the Christian religion, or rather the missionaries that brought it, behaved like dictators. They ill-treated our people. They humiliated them. And they stole huge tracts of land from our people using the name of Jesus Christ. I want to give you this historical fact. If you go to Natal, near Durban, and you come to a place called Marian Hill, near Durban, you will find one of the biggest and one of the oldest mission schools in South Africa. Marian Hill sits on huge tracts of land. These tracts of land were stolen from the Zulu people by a missionary called Chimlet. And even to this day, the people of Marian Hill can tell you that that man was not just a missionary, he was also a crook and a pitiless exploiter of the black people. He was a monk, but he was much more than a monk. It was said that this Chimlet worshipped not God, not the Virgin Mary, but Satan himself. Let me tell you what the missionaries did. The missionaries used to employ the tactic of preaching the so-called gospel to our people. And at the same time, they used to manipulate our people into partying with some of their holiest relics. Please, there is in London a place that I saw near the London Docks in an obscure street. It is a heavily guarded warehouse which belongs to the British Museum of Humankind. We were allowed to visit this place when I was in London in 1997. And there, in that warehouse, I saw cupboard after cupboard after cupboard filled with priceless African artifacts in ivory, in bronze, in various indigenous woods, and sometimes in iron and in gold. I saw royal bangles from dead kings, bangles made of brass and bronze, bangles which showed every sign that they had been removed by force from the arms of dead men and dead women. All these things, I was told, had been collected by Theophilus Shepstone and the London Missionary Society and were sent to this museum where no African is allowed to view them. I was lucky because I was accompanied by a white woman whose father, I suspect, was a Freemason. Now, let me tell you, sir, what the missionaries did also. The missionaries established hospitals in their mission station. Reverend Moffat had a hospital in that mission station. And when an African was brought there, sick unto death, the missionary used to tell this African that as a condition to his entering the hospital, he first had to be baptized as a Christian. And also as another condition for entering the hospital and receiving missionary treatment, the sick African had to surrender all artifacts from his ancestors that he had in his possession.
My God.
One day, sir, my grandfather Zibo had an accident. He had bought himself an ox wagon, but he did not know how to control it. And one day the ox wagon plunged off a cliff, and my grandfather was badly injured. And when he was taken to a mission hospital in the west of Zululand, the first thing that the missionary said to my grandfather was this, that he knew the missionary, that my grandfather owned a heap of metal objects which he kept in one of his huts, and that as a condition for receiving treatment for his broken bones, he had to surrender all that metal property to the missionary. Those things you have got in your home are full of evil spirits, said the missionary Reverend Lee. You must let me have them so that I can take them to a holy place in England where they would be destroyed. My grandfather stood up shakily and walked out of the mission hospital. He walked, and somewhere along the road he collapsed. And tribespeople who knew him took him to their village. And there, when a passing Afrikaner doctor rode by in his ox wagon, the black people asked this doctor, who was not a missionary, to please take care of my grandfather. The doctor took my grandfather aboard his ox wagon and took him to his farm far away. And there, the Afrikaner doctor, a herbalist really, as he was called, a Genees Jeren, he treated my grandfather free of charge, and he didn't place any conditions for his treatment. And my grandfather, out of gratitude, returned to his village a healthy man and took 3 fat cows and led them with his sons to the faraway home of the Afrikaner doctor. Again and again, our people were robbed of their heritage. Our people were robbed of scientific equipment. Our people were robbed of irreplaceable artifacts, some of them dating back hundreds of years into the past, by the missionaries, especially the London Missionary Society. And if you go into that museum, sir, near the docks in London, you will find what I saw, and it will make you weep. Now, let me tell you, sir, when missionaries came to South Africa, they deliberately created a huge between those blacks that they converted and those blacks who resisted Christian conversion. They created such a divide that they actually broke up huge families. And it got worse when Catholics, Anglicans, Methodists, and Presbyterians spread through South Africa. There was developed deliberately in Africans of different religious denominations the same enmity that exists now between the Catholics and the Protestants in England. Black Protestants were forbidden from talking to black Catholics. Black Wesleyans did not even ask the time of day from black Presbyterians. It was such a total chaos, and the only beneficiaries were the missionaries themselves. But let me tell you more what used to be done. Missionaries used to forbid any converted Christian black from having anything whatsoever to do with an unconverted black. Love relationships between so-called heathen blacks and Catholic blacks were forbidden by the missionaries. That was how my father and my mother parted, traumatizing my life even before I was born. My father had been a confessing Catholic, and he fell in love with what was called a heathen Zulu woman. Now, the condition for such a love was that the woman had to submit herself into the Christian faith. And my grandfather, a fierce old warrior, contemptuously refused to have my mother become a Christian convert. I used to kill white men at Isandlwa, and I am not going to allow a daughter of mine to follow the religion of spear food. And sir, if in a mission station a church-going black paid court to a heathen black, the church-going black was brutally punished by the missionary, and he was punished in a way which to Africans was horrible. Inside the mission church, there were the pews, the benches on which the congregation sat. But next to the door, just as you entered the door of the church, there were special benches for those Christian blacks who had broken the law. And so, if it was found by the white missionary or the black missionary that a certain person had had anything to do with a heathen, that person was punished in a very terrible way. He or she was made to sit next to the door of the church inside, so that all who entered the church would look at this one and know that here is a lawbreaker who had broken the laws of Jesus Christ. You see, after my mother and my father had separated, my mother gave birth to me. And for a long time, I suffered as a child because I was born illegitimate. I was called a bastard. I had no rights as a human being. The law of the Zulus at that time was very, very strict regarding illegitimate children. My mother suffered. She was often beaten up by other girls in the village. And I suffered too. Other children were forbidden from playing with me. And I herded cattle in the bush alone. And there, many strange things happened to me which do not concern us here, however. And when I was 7 years old, there came to my grandfather's village a brother of my father's. And he asked to take me away from there. And my grandfather said, nothing could please me more than that this little bastard should be removed from my home. He is a disgrace to my family. And so I was taken by my father's brother to the south of Natal, where I was baptized as a Catholic, and the ridiculous name Credo was placed upon my head, a name I hate very much even to this day. I grew up, say, as a Catholic, and we were all Catholics in our home, as most people in Natal are. And then one day, after we had left Natal, my father left the Catholic Church and adopted one of the worst branches of the Christian religion that you can find. My father started following the teachings of an American woman called Mary Baker Eddy. She, who was the leader of the Christian Science Church. Under the laws of the Christian Science Church, you are not allowed to take medicine under any circumstances, no matter how seriously ill you are. And for years we suffered, my half-sisters and my half-brothers and I. We sickened and we were not allowed to take any medicament. We had suffered before under the Catholic Church, having to confess sins every weekend to a priest we could barely see. Sometimes it was so ridiculous that we often created sins against ourselves we had not committed in order to please the Catholic Father. And now we were suffering under the teachings of Mary Baker Eddy, teachings which I now see in my adult life as having been the very essence of the purest rubbish. Then, after a great sickness in 1937, I was taken, during that great sickness, I was taken back to Zululand by my father's brother, Anton. And there, I was healed by a man I had been conditioned to be looked upon as a stupid heathen, namely my grandfather. The the father of my mother. After that, I began to see how great the knowledge that the black people possessed was. I began to see that the missionaries were actually deceiving us, that they were teaching us lies at school about our people. And then one day I got into serious trouble. I was now a budding artist, painting pictures for the mission school. And I made the mistake of portraying the Virgin Mary as a Zulu woman, based upon my mother's face. And I portrayed Jesus Christ as a Zulu boy. And for that, I was caned and expelled from school. The reason I was not caned by the white missionary only, I was caned also by the black teachers who accused me of having insulted Jesus Christ by painting him as a black. So you can see, sir, the stark mental confusion into which our people had been plunged. Men caning a boy because he had painted Christ as a black man, and saying that by blackening Christ's face, this boy had blasphemed. One must understand, Mr. David Icke, that we human beings are weak creatures. We fall victim to ill health. We fall victim to sometimes nameless fear. And that is where the forces of darkness pounce upon us when we are afraid, sick, or insecure. Many black people who were converted easily to Christianity were people who had been traumatized by war. You see, during the great Zulu wars in Natal, thousands of black men and women used to run away from Zululand to Durban, where huge refugee camps, bigger than anything we have ever seen in Africa, soon blossomed. These refugee camps were fertile ground for Christian missionary operations. These refugee camps were places where many a self-seeking missionary was sure of walking away with several hundred converts.